The Hawk, the Hound, and the Butterfly, Chapter 4, Apollo, Part 2. The last ray of sunlight vanished as Apollo was lowered deeper and deeper into the earth. Now, the only light came from the flickering lantern in the middle of the darkness. Apollo stood beneath it, arms crossed hugging his body. He watched the shadow and light dance across the wooden floor. The chains clinked and rattled, echoing down the elevator shaft. The air grew thicker, like it was closing in on him, squeezing him tight. Apollo stretched his fingers, curling them into a fist and tensing, then unfurling and relaxing them. He saw Artemis's face, frozen with fear, and he just stood there and let that sphere take her. Apollo shook his head. He breathed in through his nose and out through his mouth, trying to control his breathing that had quickened. The journey downward was only just the beginning. He needed a distraction. Apollo focused on the pain in his left shoulder. It had subsided to a dull ache, but he wondered how much more damage he had caused it. Apollo sat beneath the lantern and slowly unbuttoned his shirt, shrugging it off his shoulder. The bandage around it had torn and come loose. He unravelled what was left of it. It was difficult to see the full extent of the damage he'd done, but what he could see was a dark purple reddish-coloured bruise that sunk deep into his pale skin. It stretched around his shoulder and down his arm. The healers had given him a lotion that he was supposed to use on it every morning and night, but after what had happened today, he'd need to soak his body in a barrel of the stuff. Apollo did what he could to rewrap the tattered bandage around his shoulder, covering as much of the bruise as he could. The lords and ladies of his father's court would faint at the sight of such a ghastly wound. Apollo ran his hand down his back. He winced as he found the spot where the sphere had rammed into his spine. No doubt he'd find another bruise there. It was going to be fun trying to sleep tonight. Apollo sighed and slipped his shirt back on. The chains continued to clink and the gears continued to grind as the elevator dove deeper. Apollo pulled his knees up to his chest and tucked his head into them. "Please be safe, Artemis," he whispered. The elevator stopped with a clunk. Apollo lifted his head and blinked his eyes open. Light streamed in through the cracks of the wooden door. He stood and brushed his hands over his pants. The elevator gates slid open. A large shadowy figure morphed into two armour-clad guards, golden griffins embellished on their breastplates over their hearts. "Afternoon, my lord," one of the guards said. "Here for the family reunion, are you?" Apollo shook his head. "What?" "I have to see my father," Apollo said. He pushed past the guards and hobbled down the hallway. Apollo guessed his father would be in Offa Hall, meeting with his generals and a select few of the nobility of Arcadia. It was his war room, and he hardly ever stepped foot out of it, at least not for Apollo. Apollo hadn't been down in the underground halls for some time, mainly because he'd been away fighting for what was discussed in the halls, but also because he hated the feeling he got when he was down there. Even with its wide openings and high ceilings, he still felt like they were closing in on him. Apollo ran his hand along the wall as he walked. They did seem closer together than he'd remembered, darker, dustier, and lonelier. It wasn't difficult to find the doors of Offa Hall, even if you hadn't been down there as many times as Apollo had. The deep mahogany wood was laden with a gold decorative design of a rearing griffin, the family crest that stood for a century now. Apollo paused before the doors. He took a deep breath and pressed against them. Stepping through the doors, Apollo's heart stopped. Kneeling before the king was Athena. "Father?" Apollo said, his voice quiet in the large room as all eyes turned to him. Men and women from all over Arcadia would come to visit his father. He would hear the quarrels of farmers and merchants, discuss the war effort with his commanders, but those who spent the most time in his ear were the noble men and women of Arcadia. They were all there now, seated around a long wooden table that cut the room in half. There were two women from the southern cities who wore elegant silk dresses the colour of a sunburnt sky. Several men and women from the seafaring trade city of Tripolis who wore strings of pearls as belts. There was even a man from the border city of Gordas who draped himself in a wolfskin cape and wore its head as a hat. But most of all were the nobles of Arcus. They stood out in their white, heavy velvet clothing with golden griffin ornaments. At the far end of the table was the king, upon his throne that sat on a dais. He looked down at Apollo, as he always did. The king's deep brown eyes were stern, his lips pressed hard together. His brown hair had become speckled with grey since Apollo saw him last, but he still wasn't any less intimidating. Apollo still stood in the doorway. There was so much he had to say, and had to say it quickly, but his words had escaped him. Apollo stretched his fingers and took a breath in and out. I have something urgent to tell. Hush, lad. A hand grasped his arm, tight but gentle. Apollo turned to see his uncle Helios standing beside him. You'll get your chance. His smile was comforting, mainly because Apollo knew it was genuine. It also told him that now was the time for patience. Apollo nodded. He looked back at his father, who was glaring at him through disapproving eyes. Apollo's gaze fell to the ground. As I was saying, Athena said, the Tekkens are up to something. Here is a list of names I found at a covert base of theirs. Athena handed the king a scroll of parchment. What had she been doing at a Tekken base? Apollo hadn't heard of any reconnaissance missions, but Athena was never one to obey the rules. The king ran his eyes over the parchment. These names, the king said as he pointed at the parchment, they're the ones who've gone missing? Athena nodded. Look at the second last name. Apollo's heart quickened. It couldn't be her name, could it? Artemis. The king's voice boomed across the room. The crowd of nobles and generals gasped, keeping their words to whispers. They think they can take a child of Arcadia? They've already taken her, Apollo said. His uncle reached for Apollo's arm again, but Apollo pulled away. He couldn't stay silent any longer, whether his words made sense or not. Apollo stumbled up towards the dais. When the king's eyes fell on him, he stopped. Come forward, boy, the king said, his voice a low growl. Slowly, he walked up the steps to the king's throne, his father's throne. Apollo glanced at Athena and saw her kneeling, reminding himself that he was supposed to kneel too. Apollo crouched down beside Athena, ignoring the scowl from her burning into the side of his head. What do you know of this? The king held up the parchment of names. Apollo said. He cleared his throat and stretched his fingers at his side. Stop blubbering, boy, and speak. I was there, Apollo blurted out. I was there when they took her. Gasps erupted from the crowd behind him. What? The king said through gritted teeth. His eyes widened and his nostrils flared. The king rose from his throne. Apollo tilted his head up and up. He strode down the steps and grabbed Apollo's injured left arm, pulling him to his feet. A pain shot through his shoulder. He was a young boy again, being scolded, but this was worse than tearing a hole in his good clothes. Explain yourself, the king said. His deep brown eyes looked only at Apollo, as if they were the only two in the room. We were at the woods. Well, at first it was one, but then it became two, and it floated. They floated, and they attacked me. And the other one flew in circles around Artemis, and, she disappeared, Apollo said, his stuttered words trying to form audible sentences. What are you on about? Do you even hear yourself when you speak? Athena said, suddenly standing beside him, arms crossed and head tilted back. The king grunted and let go of Apollo's arm. He turned away and looked up at the Arcadian coat of arms on the wall behind his throne. A proud golden griffin on a white background, the same as the one etched into the door. Helios came forward and stood beside Apollo. His presence alone was enough to calm Apollo. What did it look like, lad? The thing you saw in the woods? His uncle asked. Apollo wished he could keep himself as cool and composed as his uncle always was. It was some kind of metal sphere with a blinking red light. Apollo rubbed his arm. Metal sphere? Athena looked at him. There was a hint of interest in her eyes now. Apollo nodded. Athena rustled through her cape. She pulled out her hand, turned it over, and dropped a metal sphere on the steps of the dais. It rolled along the step, but just before it fell off the edge, the king planted his foot down beside it. Is that what you saw? Apollo's mouth hung open. It looked exactly like the spheres that had attacked him and Artemis, only a little smaller. He nodded. My king, the Tekkens had a room full of shelves with hundreds of these sitting on them. Could this be one of the creator's new weapons? Helios asked the king. Possibly. The king rubbed his scruffy chin. Why do you say it only attacked you? He looked at Apollo, waiting for an answer. Well, I guess 'cause I attacked it first? Well, I guess you didn't do a very good job, Athena said, imitating Apollo. I tried. You should have tried harder, the king growled. Apollo bit his bottom lip to stop it from trembling. He looked down at the steps. They had a curve in them from being stepped on so many times. Helios, get this to the smiths. See if they can work out what it is. Helios nodded and calmly scooped up the sphere with one hand. Athena, you'll have to clean this mess up. Go find Artemis. Bring her back. If that fool Dagar thinks he can just take one of my own away from me, he'll soon regret it. Athena smiled. Father, please let me go with Athena, Apollo said, looking up at the king. You? Don't be such a fool, Athena snarled. You already had a chance to protect Artemis, said the king. You failed. I know I failed, and I regret it more than anything. But please, I know I can help. Apollo looked deep into his father's eyes. Somewhere in there had to be a father that cared for his son. As Apollo searched, his father's eyes softened. The king bent down so he was at eye level with Apollo. He put a hand on Apollo's shoulder. You have so much of your mother in you, he said in almost a whisper. Apollo wasn't sure if the king was telling him or reminding himself. The king shook his head. He pulled away from Apollo and stood upright. His furrowed brow and pursed lips returned. You will go with Athena, the king said, louder so everyone could hear. What, my king, I don't need... It's not a matter of what you need, Athena. Athena huffed. She folded her arms and turned away. Apollo will go with you. Fine, but if he gets himself killed, I'm taking none of the blame. Athena turned to Apollo. I'll gather the supplies. Be at the stables by dawn. We leave then with or without you. Apollo frowned. We? I wouldn't go swimming alone with you. She flicked her hair in Apollo's face and stomped off through the doors. Apollo turned back to the king. Thank you, father. I give you my word, I will bring her back. The king slowly walked up the stairs to his throne. I hope you do keep your word, the king said, lowering himself into his throne, because if you don't, it's best you don't return at all. Apollo's heart skipped a beat. He'd thought for a moment that maybe his father did care for him, but that thought had vanished with those words, as did any he felt for his father. I will bring her back, Apollo said. My king,